Hi, everyone, and welcome to CoFence's The Rise of AI webinar. On the agenda for today, we will introduce our speakers, provide insight into the top 2024 observations, take a deep dive into each of the top 5 phishing trends, and then we'll review a few notable phishing campaigns. At the end, we will have a live Q&A session to answer any questions that you may have. For today's speakers, I'm Rachel Roldan, VP of Product. We have Chance Caldwell, who is our Senior Director of PDC, which is the Phishing Defense Center. Josh Bartolome is our Chief Security Officer, and Max Gannon is the Manager of Intel Analysis. Now, before we dive in, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website in the next couple of days. And throughout the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A window in your console to submit any questions that you have. We do ask that when submitting a question, please add which section it relates to so that we can fully and accurately answer any questions that you have. And we will cover as many questions live as time permits. And with that, I will hand it over to Josh.
Thank you, Rachel. So today, we're going to be talking obviously about the phishing threats that we've seen throughout, 2024 and the theme of AI, which is, kind of in everybody's mind in the cyber realm today. So who are we for those that aren't aware? So CoFence was actually one of the first, if not the first, pioneer in the phishing security awareness landscape back in 2011. Over the years, CoFence has expanded out into not just security awareness and training, but also phishing detection and response and managed services. And as of today, 25% of the Fortune 1000 companies actually trust CoFence with their phishing security awareness and technical response. We've provided well over 1 billion phishing simulations and helped train over 35 million of your customers, or excuse me, of your employees. And in doing all of the work that we do, on average, we see a malicious email landing into an employee's inbox every 42 seconds. So to get into the, kind of set the stage for this conversation today, when we look back at 2024, like I mentioned, in the previous slide, on average, we were seeing one email every 42 seconds, one malicious email every 42 seconds throughout the entirety of 2024. And the sad news is that does not look like it's going to be slowing down at all. Email is still the primary threat vector for data breaches. Yes, there are absolutely other sources of data breaches, but by and far, look at any popular media, it's anywhere between 75% and 95% of data breaches are actually because of phishing attacks. A lot of what we're seeing now, which the rest of our panelists here are going to go through in the next hour or so, is giving you examples and talking about how AI is actually enabling and fostering faster and more iterative multi-layer attacks, how they're exploiting real-time global events so much quicker than they used to before. There was a lag of a couple days, a week. Now you're talking minutes, hour. They're spreading the wealth, if you will, of the channels that they're using to actually use for communications, different Slack, GitHub, Teams, SMS, it's just running the gauntlet. And the reality is nobody's safe. We're seeing attacks coming across all industries, all countries globally. And this is by no means fear, and I'm not trying to kind of get anybody, agitated here. It's just we need to be aware that this is actually one of the largest threats that we're seeing today. And so now with that, I'm going to hand this off to Max to talk a little bit about some of these AI trends we're seeing.
Thanks, Josh. So first off, obviously, we're going to talk about how AI accelerates malware. One of the key stats here you can see is about how we saw a lot more new malware families. So this is unusual. You would expect threat actors to create more malware families over time, but suddenly seeing a large number of brand new malware families indicates that somehow threat actors are getting better at creating new malware families quickly, which seems a little unlikely. Now, out of these new malware families, a really large percent were remote access Trojans, and we'll get into later why specifically remote access Trojans lend themselves so much to AI generation and why threat actors typically prefer them. So here we've got the key parts of AI accelerating malware generation. So of course, generative AI is going to help. But a big part of this is that generative AI reduces the need for threat actors to really know what they're doing. Anybody with a computer can generate decently advanced malware these days using generative AI. They don't have to have any idea at all. It's really lowering the bar. So this also means that different variants of malware families can be generated. So this means that if a security system develops a signature for one malware family, all the threat actor has to do is go back to a system, regenerate a new variant, and suddenly it's not being detected anymore. Another problem with these is that these AI-powered malware especially use adaptive learning algorithms, so they adapt to defenses much faster than the malware families that have been created by threat actors up until now. So it's really just advancing the speed and the capabilities of the malware. So first, we're going to go into a campaign that we believe is likely generated. So one of the indicators is that all of the emails have almost the exact same content, just slightly different. Typically, what happens if somebody gives a prompt and says, generate me 30 copies of this. So these emails all had that little bar with the PDF icon. And it was in the same place, these very similar subjects, very similar text content. They were slightly different, but they all use the same general format. So this delivered a remote access Trojan that we called PocoRat because it used Poco C++ libraries. So another thing that was unusual about this campaign was that it overwhelmingly targeted one sector. Typically, when we see remote access Trojans, they're used more widely to target a bunch of different sectors. But this one was used by a specific set of threat actors to target a specific industry, which is not something we expect to see. So you have a breakdown of the top 5 malware families and malware types that we saw in 2024. So on the left here, you can see the little checkboxes indicating the capabilities of the various malware families. So Agent Tesla Keylogger was the most popular. You'll notice it only checks 3 of the 5 boxes. Then we have Remco's Rat. This checks all of the boxes because it's remote access Trojan, so it can do just about anything. And then we have Formbook and Snake Keylogger. They were popular because they're easy to use and basically free to set up, but they aren't really complex. They don't have a lot of capabilities. And then at the bottom, you've got XWormRat, again, remote access Trojan that has all these capabilities. So as you can see on the right, keyloggers were the most popular, but remote access Trojans were also pretty popular. And we've seen remote access Trojans continue to be popular going into this year. So we've really seen a shift. It used to be keyloggers and information stealers were the most popular ones, but information stealers simply don't have the capabilities of remote access Trojans, and they're oftentimes too complex. So threat actors transition to keyloggers, and now they're slowly transitioning to remote access Trojans. So there's some basic steps that you can take to combat malware's rise. So the biggest one is relevant and real security awareness training. So our PhishMe team releases simulations that are based on actual emails and campaigns that the intelligence team finds. So these are very relevant and very real. So all you need to do is find emails that are targeting, for example, the mining sector, and you look for things that are up to date. And it's pretty easy to find relevant and real SIMs, but the key is it takes a little bit of extra effort. But if you find things that are actually going to be seen by your employees, then they're going to be trained to actually prevent these attacks. So the next step is really about maintaining a list of remote access tools, because remote access Trojans and remote access tools there's a very fine line between them. And we've seen a lot of repurposed remote access tools recently. So by maintaining a list saying these are the tools that are approved, people can easily say, okay, this is a threat actor trying to get me to install ConnectWise Rat because my organization doesn't actually have it on the list. So a follow-up step of this is, of course, to block all the remote access tools that you don't use. It's pretty straightforward and can honestly help prevent a really large number of infections. And the final step is, goes hand in hand with the training, having an active reporting culture, getting people to report suspicious and malicious things really helps boost your security. And now I'm going to hand it off to Josh to talk about generative AI.
Thanks, Max. So Gen AI, it's been in the news nonstop over the last 2 years, it seems. And a lot of organizations are leveraging Gen AI to the betterment of their organization, and that's fantastic. Unfortunately, with any new technology, right, the threat actors are using it as well. We're seeing a large increase in the use of Gen AI, or what we suspect to be Gen AI, based on the patterns that Max was mentioning. You kind of see this rash of new in these iterative developments. And, if we look at this quote here from Deloitte, it's expected that the use of Gen AI by threat actors will actually increase the use of deepfakes in attacks, which will unfortunately increase the cost to all of us by an average, by an estimated $40 billion annually in 2027 for losses. So let's look at this. Why, right? So the typical mantra for phishing detection is look for grammar errors, right? Look for structures that are a little bit different in the emails. Look for, abnormalities. But the standard is look for grammatical errors. Now with Gen AI, creating text is grammatically perfect. And not just that, but it can create text in native languages around the globe. So now it's not like a Google Translate that's a little bit off if you're a native speaker. So it's really quick and easy to create a bulk load of emails, text copy. Also, the creation of phishing sites, the actual landing pages. So you get the email, it says click here, you click, and then it's a Microsoft O365 login, an Amazon login, DocuSign account. Creating those fake sites now is trivial. Now, threat actors have actually had it so that they can do these auto gens for these sites previously, but now they can create them at a scale and with a level of customization for your organization, for the targeted victim, potential victim, and so forth, that the scale that we're seeing and the uniqueness that we're seeing of these credfish pages is actually rapidly increasing. A lot of these threat actors are now actually pulling in public data. So it's a mixture of public data, which you can find available online, as well as breach data for all the breaches that have occurred over the last couple of years, and ingesting them into LLMs and related models. So now they can actually leverage the insight this data gives into the vernacular your company uses, departments, trademarks, patterning of vendor engagements and invoicing, and get a lot of just this bulk data. They can action this quickly. And using all this that we just talked about brings us to that last piece, which it makes the phishing more pervasive and persuasive. It's targeting specific people and specific roles at scale. It's changing it just enough so that it doesn't look the same, or so that standard signature block securities, or excuse me, standard securities that use signatures can block those emails or detect them because they're just variant enough. Excuse me. Here's a great example. 3 different emails, same payload, same theme, Social Security Administration, using actual logos. The timeliness of this was on point for tax season. Excuse me. And the copy here is grammatically solid, visually solid. These are just several examples of many that we've seen with this exact theme for Social Security Administration. These are actual phishing emails. So while we can't say these were AI generated, the diverseness and the volume that we saw leads to that end assumption. With these emails specifically, once you click the link, you click the action, threat actors are actually really nice on this one. They gave you 2 options. Either you can download the file, which will actually download a piece of malware, or you already have the file because they did have variants where there was an attachment already on the email. And I already have the file. Click, I have opened the file. It'll ask you to log in because they're very, polite like that. And then they'll actually capture your credentials. So we are seeing now a combination, a conjoining, if you will, of a lot of different threat tactics and modes and methods all being wrapped together, whereas in the past it was a little cumbersome to do all of that. But now with Gen AI and the rapid generation iteration of these types of payloads and services, it's unfortunately kind of trivial. The reality of it is, and I'm not trying to strike fear in everybody, but as we talk about this, when we talk about, here's lessons learned and things that we can do collectively to help combat this, you got to keep these things in mind. AI threats are just overwhelming traditional defenses. Most traditional defenses are signature based or heuristics based, so they can actually do variations to a point. AI is allowing threat actors to do a lot of variations very quickly, and it's exceeding that threshold of detection in real time. Security teams, I mean, we're struggling, right? We all are. Alert fatigue is the thing. Analysis paralysis is also a thing, and we're all kind of running with that. We need to really take this seriously because there are gaps in our protection. This is hitting us hard and heavy here. And offensive AI is so much easier to develop faster than defensive AI because they don't have the same constraints we have. They don't care about HIPAA. They don't care about PCI or security compliance or GDPR. And I mean, the reality is they have the funding for it, or they just kind of, procure or steal services to run their model. So they have a leg up than the defenders here. So we have to kind of make sure that we're doing all that we can and help our population, our employees, and our organization stay secure. That being said, talking about some AI generated tech, I'm going to pass over to Chance to talk about BEC.
Thank you, Josh. So yeah, our third trend for 2024 was just a huge increase, seeing a huge increase in the business email compromise attacks across all industries, all sectors. As you can see here, we saw a 70% increase between 2023 and 2024, and that can all be lended back to AI. BECs are easy, right? Most of the time, you don't have URLs, you don't have attachments, it's simple conversational emails. With AI, these threat actors are able to click a button and send out hundreds, if not thousands, of these emails at a time. It used to be that if they wanted to curate them for individual users, they'd have to spend time writing each of those up themselves. But now, with AI, they're able to generate those incredibly quickly, send them out, and not have to worry about it. They prioritize volume because it works. These emails get past your security systems because they don't have those indicators like URLs or attachments to scan against. If they can send 1,000 emails that get through your systems to your employees, someone's going to interact with that email, whether it's 1, 2, 5, however many people, someone's going to interact with it. And even one interaction could lead to a bigger breach of your organization. The simplicity of the BECs is what makes them effective. Just because they might not be as dangerous as malware and credential phishing in a lot of cases because they focus more on wire transfers or other monetary transactions, they still can lead to those breaches. So you need to treat them with just as high of a priority as you would anything else. One example here we have of a BEC campaign that we saw last year. It was pretending to be fake invoices with fake conversations with a CEO or other high-level employee at the user's company. The way it worked is that it had a fake chain of emails on the email they were sending the user, where the first chain or email in that chain shows that they're talking to the CEO and telling him, "Hey, you have these overdue invoices. We need you to help us get them paid." And then it'll show the CEO responding back, asking, "Hey, can you please send these to this person or to this accounting team to take care of this?" And then the final message on it would be, "Hey, we got told to send this to you. Can you take care of this for us?" While that whole interaction is, fake, it's AI that has allowed them to make something that in depth. They're able to quickly create those specific emails that has their CEO's name on it, that it's able to have these lengthy conversations, whereas before they would have had to create those individually themselves. Uh, this is easy for them. They don't have to worry very much about this. They're able to scrape information from the internet to easily put in here to make it specific to the user. They're adding urgency, they're adding authenticity with their techniques, and I see this being the trend going forward for BECs. They're going to continue to become more in depth because they're easily able to do that. They're easily able to adapt and add new features and techniques to these emails as we go along. And then in our second example here, This style of email was between a BEC and a sextortion scam. But what it really highlights is a technique that is going to be used heavily moving forward. This threat actor or threat group scrapes the user's home address, and then they would put that into Google Maps, where they would screenshot, whatever location came up. Sometimes it was their home, sometimes it was a picture of the street, or even just an empty lot. So, it's not always incredibly accurate, but when it is accurate, that's going to scare the user. They say, oh, they have a picture of my house. This is real, this is authentic. And those types of web scraping techniques is going to be the way of the future. Whether they're scraping your social media, your company website, whatever it is, that's going to allow them to make their emails that much more effective going forward. And finally, a few things that we like to talk about with BECs include, we recommend creating and enforcing a authentication protocol list, DKIM, SPF, DMARC, all the like, to make sure that your company is as safe as possible when getting these external emails. Yes, threat actors can spoof, but this makes it a lot more likely that you're going to stop these emails, because most threat actors don't go through the effort of actually doing the spoofing. Multi-factor authentication is another recommendation we have, because even if the threat actor does, find themselves successful in stealing credentials from your employees, multi-factor makes it that much more difficult for them to get in, because just because they have the login doesn't mean they have access to the phone verification or whatever other method you're using for your multi-factor. We also have seen success with our customers creating alerts for inbound emails that contain their employee's name as an alias, while not having their corresponding email address as the sender. This combination of attributes means that it's likely a BEC email, and so they automatically take those emails coming in, quarantine them, or set them off to the side, whatever it is, so that it doesn't go to the user before they're able to verify. And lastly, we also recommend creating internal processes that require additional approval for things like wire transfers or other payment methods, because most of BECs are asking for some kind of payment. And if you internally have your employees getting approval on these things before they actually send the money, you're much more likely to stop potential erroneous wire transfers. And then we go to trend number 4. And this just looks at the rise in polymorphic phishing. And for those who don't know what polymorphic is, that just means that these phishing attacks are ever evolving, ever changing, ever being modified, so that you're not getting the same credential phish, same malware, whatever it is, consistently from email to email. As you can see in the quote here, from the Phishing Defense Center, we talk about how polymorphic phishing is making it that much more difficult for traditional security systems to keep your employees safe. And that's because those systems are looking for very specific IOCs or very specific indicators that are being changed in every single email sent to your employees. And so it's not capturing them. It might get the first one that you saw, but it's not going to get the second, third, or so on, because they did change them however much from email to email. And it's why we recommend a human and AI technique, combination. They should be working in tandem, and I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Polymorphic phishing is on the rise, and we can see that in just our daily credential phishing, that we see here in the Cofense Phishing Defense Center. It used to be that the phishing emails going out were generic enough for every person, so that the threat actors didn't have to work on modifying each email. They were broad in scope, the senders, how they address the person, the signatures, and so forth. But now they're becoming very specific, where the user's name is listed in every email, the signature is different in every email, the sender is different in every email, and so forth, so that they're able to make that very specific and useful to that person, the individual, while not having to take the time to do it themselves because they have these AI tools to generate them, as Josh talked about earlier with generative AI. This has made it that much easier for emails to bypass filters because your filters are just looking at this email and saying, I've never seen this email before, even though it is technically from the same malicious campaign, but they've changed the details just enough to make it unrecognizable for your traditional security systems. This is reducing detection rates across the board because credential phishing, malware, whatever it is getting through in higher volumes because of the uniqueness of each one I've been talking about. Not only are they able to change these emails, over a length of time, they're able to do this in real time. The attackers are changing these emails, minute to minute or every 5 minutes, whatever it is, because they can sit there, see what's working, make a modification, and they can do this at a scale that defensive techniques right now on our side just can't do for the most part, at least on an automated fashion. And this is why static defenses are struggling. They don't have the ability to use the context to say, this is the same as this, and so I can quarantine or block this email. Taking a look at one example of a polymorphic campaign, we had holiday bonus themed credential phishing threats last year. These emails were kind of your typical bonus themed emails where they're saying, hey, you've earned a holiday bonus for the year. Click on this attachment so that you can see how to get your bonus and so forth. And then when you go to the bonus invoice, it would tell you, hey, you need to go to this QR code to sign into Microsoft and get your bonus. The way AI is being used here in a poly is that each of these are designed specifically for the user. The names listed change in every email. The dates listed change in every email. The subject, the from address, even the QR code here is going to change. And that makes it so that your security systems do not realize that they've already seen this threat and can remediate it. A secondary technique here that's being used also is that when the user goes to that credential phishing page, it's using the user's domain to go out and scrape their company's web page and then put their logos on the credential phishing page, making it that much more real to the user. And then here we have a secondary campaign from last year where if you, as a human, look at these two emails, you can see that they're very alike. The subject lines are very similar. They're using the user's first name in the subject line. They're asking for proposals. They're giving you a link to review, and then they're giving a signature. These two emails came out within months of each other, but we saw this campaign pretty much the entire year and even going into 2025. And you can tell that AI is most likely being used here because of one, the scale that we're seeing these generated, but also how similar they are, whether that's because it's the same threat actor, threat group, or even just using the same, phishing kit. These emails were not seen as the same thing within the company's security systems, and so they continued to come in despite the fact that they had already seen this campaign before. When looking at the defensive tactics for polymorphic threats, it's difficult, right? They're ever changing, meaning your security systems have to be ever changing. If you only have static defenses that need very specific parameters, you're probably not going to be very secure moving forward if you don't have something else in place that is going to help you detect these threats. As I kind of talked about earlier, we recommend a combination of human and automated techniques to make sure that you're secure. You have your AI there to take care of the wide scope, the generic, the basic email, and you have the human there that can take care of the contextual emails, the more difficult emails, the things that we haven't seen yet, and then they can even take that knowledge and train the AI to better, automate what they're seeing moving forward. If you have just one or the other, you're not going to be prepared for these type of polymorphic defenses moving forward. You need to teach users to recognize why something might be malicious instead of just teaching pattern recognition. If you're just teaching pattern recognition, they're not going to be able to help your organization fight these attacks because they're going to be changing at such a scope that they're not going to be able to recognize the emails as malicious. So teach them why something's malicious, not a pattern. And then finally, have email quarantining capabilities that are flexible, that you're able to search multifaceted factors, and you're not stuck at looking just for a specific URL or a specific hash, because those things will be changing from email to email, and you're only going to be removing 1 or 2 emails at a time versus the large scope of emails that are going to be coming in rapidly to your organization. And I will send it over to Max.
Thanks, Chance. So we've talked about this a little bit, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the diversification we've seen that we believe is related to AI. So the first stat we have here is that tax-related campaigns have gone up. So this seems kind of in opposition to the diversification component. But the thing about AI is it goes based on training. So if you just tell AI, generate me a phishing email, it's not going to do a great job. But if you say, generate a tax-related email, it can probably do something pretty good. So we've seen an increase in tax-related campaigns, but we've also seen an increase in the different companies. So, you've got like IRS, the HMRC, a bunch of different companies from different countries are being spoofed as opposed to just the IRS, like has been the case up until recently. So we saw a decrease in multi-factor authentication themed campaigns. So this actually makes sense as for a significant period of time, the multi-factor authentication themed campaigns we saw were basically the same campaign with minor changes. They didn't really have a lot of significant changes between the campaigns. And that really made them relatively easy to block once people started to get an understanding of them. So threat actors started to move away from that as a theme. So another big thing that we've seen is an increase in legitimate files. So this directly relates to the use of remote access tools and remote access Trojans because many of these use legitimate files. So this is both a way for threat actors to obscure what they're doing and for them to make reporting difficult because defenders can't simply report legitimate Windows executables. So as I said, the tactics are becoming more diverse, but they're also becoming harder to detect. And this has been talked about previously in several ways. One of the easiest is just that simple things like punctuation and grammar are no longer good indicators that it's a phish. So they've continued to exploit emotional triggers, but they've really taken advantage of current events because with everything in the news, it's a lot easier to take whatever AI you've trained and say, generate me a campaign based on this news event, or generate me a campaign based on this news event that I believe is likely to happen, or something along those lines. We've also seen an increase in mimicking trusted brands, especially with certain situations like the tax one saying, your tax deadline is due, that sort of thing. And threat actors have really pretty easily started using AI to improve the psychological manipulation aspects of their campaigns. And as this has gone on, traditional based defenses have really started to lose effectiveness because the signatures they looked for are really just not there. So this is a report that we did where we looked at campaigns that had customization. So typically this means the recipient's name in the subject line or the recipient's company's name in the subject line or some kind of identifiable information that has been customized to the recipient. So a lot of times this is done by threat actors using scraping tools to find, emails listed on a company's website, that kind of thing. And then they just add details to the campaign. So these kind of campaigns typically indicate a little bit more effort put in by the threat actor because they're a little bit more sophisticated. So we looked at what industries are most affected by these sort of campaigns. And as you can see, finance and insurance was significantly more affected than any other industry. So we saw a lot of really customized campaigns. So this is everything from saying, your Phish Me HR report is that you have to sign this to saying, here's a DocuSign document that you need to actually sign, and here's the person's name and the company that they'd be signing it for. So we were a little surprised at how big of a difference there was with the targeting the finance and insurance sector. So this is an example of something that threat actors can do once they put their minds to it. So they don't have to just look for news events. They can also make their own. So this one is obviously particularly inflammatory, and it'll get your attention really quick. And they used a lot of good indicators that it's from the New York Times. And you've got the little copyright at the bottom, you've got the logo, you've got some of the formatting you'd expect to see. It even appears to come from the New York Times if you're not paying too much attention. So threat actors have really put a lot of effort into creating these campaigns and using AI to generate campaigns based on themes that they think are likely to happen. So here's an example of some of the more themed generation campaigns. So these car insurance related campaigns deliver remote access Trojans. And uh, as you can see side by side, they don't say the same thing, but they have the same sort of theme, still themed around the car insurance emails, but they still want you to click a link and they still deliver remote access Trojans. So it looks very prompt based. So now we're going to go over some of the notable finished intelligence reports that we did this year, specifically flash alerts and strategic analysis reports. So one of the things that we covered was SVG file abuse over time. So SVGs were abused pretty frequently a bit ago in the past, and it became an issue. People started blocking them, and then they kind of faded into the background. People forgot about them, and then they came back, and threat actors started abusing them again. So this is just a pretty simple, straightforward email with an attached SVG. But when we looked into it, we noticed that these SVG files had a lot of similarities. So turns out there's a tool called AutoSmuggle that threat actors were using, and they were just generating these SVG files. And this was created back in 2022, but it didn't start to see widespread usage until 2024. So threat actors very much are taking advantage of these tools to generate content. So here we did a breakdown of the notable campaigns that we've seen utilizing SVG files. As you can see, there's only a couple of notable incidents in the past, 2015, 2017, 2022. But then we hit 2023 to 2024, and especially in 2024, we see all these X-worm rats being delivered. So this has all the indicators of somebody generating a campaign and using a known tool to generate content for the campaign. So they're doing almost nothing on their own. So here's a campaign. I mentioned we saw a lot of tax themed ones. So here's a particularly good one because you notice the GitHub link. You see that and you're like, well, obviously it doesn't link to GitHub. It actually does. That actually leads to the US taxes, the legitimate group US taxes on GitHub. So you'd think, okay, if it's coming from US taxes, it's got to be legitimate. So we've also seen this with New Zealand Inland Revenue and a few other companies. So you think, okay, it's legitimate. If I just copy paste the URL, it'll be something I can trust. So here's what happens if you go to the URL. So it pulls up these comments that you expect. And then in the top right, you'll notice it's downloading a zip file. So what the threat actors did was they actually found a way to go to legitimate repositories, upload a comment, upload a archive to the comment, delete the comment, but the archive is still available even though the comment is gone. So you go to this legitimate page, you see this legitimate content, and then you get a downloaded file and you're like, okay, well, this must be legitimate. So threat actors have found just yet another way to abuse both our trust in things and SEG's trust in things like GitHub URLs. So to wrap it all up, of course, organizations must remain knowledgeable and vigilant. So this isn't just, keeping up with podcasts and, trying to keep an eye on the news. You need to keep up with specific things that affect your industry. You need to pay careful attention and need to get constant updates about what's affecting your industry and your sector. So what's really critical to success is high quality intelligence. So this doesn't mean getting a lot of IOCs. A lot of IOCs is nice, but what really matters is the context. You need to be able to take an IOC and say, okay, what is the context of this IOC? Who did it target? What does it deliver? Where does it come from? Give me some subject lines, give me some YAR rules, give me all this context around the IOC, because just the IOC, sure, you can block it, but then you're missing out on a lot of important information. So one of the key things, we talked a lot about AI, but it's really important to note that it's difficult to state with certainty that AI is responsible because AI does not sign it. There's no little signature, no little logo, nothing saying AI did this. So it's really difficult to 100% say this is AI. But what we can do is look for the trends that were present and more specifically not present before the advent of threat actor controlled AI. So there are some broad trends such as customization beyond what's expected in a time frame by humans that indicate it's likely AI generated. So some of the campaigns that we've seen the turnaround on them was so short that it's unlikely a human went in and did all of this content and put it all together. It's more likely that AI generated it. But you still can't 100% say, look at this, this was definitely AI generated. So it's becoming more and more difficult to distinguish, and that's both for us and for a lot of our defenses. I think Josh has a few things to help wrap us up.
Thanks, Max and Chance. Fantastic information. So before we jump into Q&A, I just really wanted to give a heartfelt thanks to everybody that is attending and watching this, as well as to all our presenters. Obviously, there was a lot of data we presented in a very short period of time, and the reality is we could spend the next couple of hours continuing to talk about this. These are, just some examples of the threats that we're seeing kind of every day, which is why we obviously want to relay not just what the threats are, but items or activities or actions, I should say, that you all can do to try to help your organization and your employees. That being said, if you would like to see how Cofense can actually help reduce the risk and cost of AI phishing threats like the ones that we've covered here in this webinar, head over to the link on this Q&A page here, cofense.com/ROI-calculator to see what your potential risk mitigation and loss expectancy reductions could be. For context, that ROI calculator, we actually spent a good amount of time creating that one and actually are basing it on 2-year averages of costs, loss, and savings from our customers. So that the numbers are actually backed, so to speak. But that being said, again, really do appreciate everybody's time. I hope that you got something from our conversations here today, and let's open up Q&A. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you to all the presenters. Let's go ahead and kick off our Q&A portion of the session. And we have a few questions coming in, so we will just run through them. The first one is, which phishing kits currently have AI functionality? And Josh, I'll hand that one over to you.
That's actually a good question. So I'm going to pivot on it a little bit, though. It's not so much the kits that contain the AI, it's the AI that's used to generate the kits and the payloads. Think of it almost as a business model. Right now, you're going to have more of the large threat actor groups, the botnet style groups, right? That would be leveraging AI iteratively enough to create kits at scale, to create payloads at scale, and then they're kind of selling those kits off and those payloads off to others that may not have that level of monetary backing or expertise or size overall. That being said, there are indicators that in the near future, there could be kits that contain AI functionality more along the lines of LLMs, specifically for keyword generation and leveraging of specific data that was captured, things like breach data, things like that, specific to potential targets or potential industries. But as of right now, the majority of the AI is for generation versus actually placement inside of a kit.
Great, absolutely. Next one is, are generative AI companies doing anything to stop their software being used to create malware? Max, I'll have you take this one.
Yeah, so that one is a little bit difficult to answer because, of course, nobody's going to give statistics on their usage for that sort of thing. However, most of what threat actors do is they use custom toolkits that they've generated, so offensive AI that they can train off of whatever data sets they want without really regard to any sort of legal limitations. And they use those kits for most of what they do. So they're not really going to be going to ChatGPT and saying, generate me an email. They're going to be buying one of these kits from the dark web and using this kit to generate their campaigns. So of course we can't really do too much about those because it's threat actor created and owned. But I do know that some of the companies behind the larger publicly available models are taking steps to prevent abuse.
All right, next one we have is, which email provider is more commonly targeted or used as an attack vector for phishing? Josh, I'll punt this one back over to you.
You can't really pinpoint one, because it's kind of saying like, why are there more viruses for Windows than there are for Mac? It's volumetric, right? And it's usage. Off the cuff, I could say Microsoft, but Microsoft's one of the largest email providers in the world, right? So by volume, we're going to see that many. The reality is it's all of them. We're seeing malicious emails, either leveraging self-hosted email services, their own services that they kind of built up in their own infrastructure, Microsoft, Google, you name it, we've seen it. Same goes for email security gateways, the Symantec's, the Proofpoints, the Mimecasts, and this isn't, by any means disparaging on them, but uh, we see all of it. We see all of the infrastructure, and that's not actually, me trying to expand it out. We're literally seeing. I could probably list off well over 100 different email services and 24 different email gateways that we see malicious emails coming through every single day. So there really isn't one that's a call out more than the other, unless you ignore economy of scale.
All right. Next one is, what are actionable steps we can share with employees to improve their ability to identify these sophisticated attacks? What are some reasons to put forth as to why something might be malicious versus pattern recognition? And Max, I will hand this over to you.
All right, so with this one, it's really the same major indicators. Of course, you can't look for minor spelling mistakes, but it's stuff like if you see something that is very urgent. So honestly, in my experience, the more urgent something appears to be, the more suspicious you should be. So if something says you've got like a 2 hour deadline, honestly, probably malicious because most actual groups are going to give you more than a 2 hour deadline. So the more it's trying to scare you, the more it's trying to get you to interact, the more suspicious you should be. So another common one is Microsoft. So if you see one looks like Microsoft, you click the link and you get to the page and it says log in. Well, you're probably already logged in to Microsoft in your browser. So if you're in your browser and something's asking you to log into Microsoft again, that's suspicious. And it's the same with a bunch of other providers. You're probably already logged into everything that you need to be at work on your browser. So if something's asking for another login, you probably shouldn't get it.
And I will add on to that, Max. It's also about looking at what are the processes that have been defined within your organization? What are your normal day to day? Is what being asked of you something you would typically handle or do within your department, or would it be another department? So take a look at the conditions that are being asked of you and think, are these the processes that I normally follow, that our company has set forth within their own internal process documents? And that's pretty much a good indicator of if something should be suspicious or not. And this goes along with the next question that we have. So Cofense offers phishing simulations. Does it align with our topics today? Is it still up to date, especially now that AI related threats are becoming more prominent? And absolutely, several of our internal teams here collaborate and communicate to identify the top threats and trends, but we then defang those messages and turn those into a simulated version available inside of our PhishMe product. And we are doing that review and producing those templates on at least a weekly basis, if not reviewing those daily. And also within the products itself, we have what we call awareness newsletters. These are going to cover those same topics, but are meant to be more informative to your users versus a simulation campaign so that you can share the information, get the word out without it being an actual simulated campaign. All right, next, how frequently does your managed services see changes in phishing tactics or content? Chance, I'll have you take this one.
Yeah, we see changes every day, most of the time every hour, sometimes every few minutes. Every one of those changes is not a huge change. It doesn't mean they're coming out with, the new QR code, the new brand new threat vector, but they are minute by minute with the wording they're using, the branding that they're using, any little thing that they need to adjust so that it's getting through your security system. As we talked about earlier with the polymorphic techniques, they're changing those emails rapidly to get to your users and to be more effective. They're studying what's working and making those changes. Now, the big changes, they don't happen as often, but they do happen. And it is kind of circular as well, where you'll see them come up for a little while, go away, and then come back up again in a slightly different format. And not to mention as well the more holiday based or event based themed emails that are going to be happening, once a year, based around those events.
Right. The next one we have is phishing has never been harder to detect because of AI. So asking users to be extra vigilant is advice somewhat at odds with itself. What overall advice should security awareness teams be giving to its users? Josh, I'll have you take this one.
So, what we've seen, personally, being on the operations side and obviously with our customers, CoFence here, what I've seen the best tactics are be open, be honest, be relevant, right? So, use phishing sims of phishing emails that your organization has recently received. Communicate if you actually have fallen victim, even if it's one user. Obviously, don't name and shame, but if you follow one user, fell for a fish, communicate that out. Newsletters. If somebody reported a fish and it stopped, and you were able to quarantine out, 5, 10, 100 emails from mailboxes, and add that protection to your organization, include that name and that value prop in the newsletter, right? So it's more of a lot of those little things. And the other side of it too is a lot of the threats. There used to be very distinctness between enterprise threats and consumer threats, right? We're seeing a very big Venn over the last couple of years, especially when it comes to scams and related types of threats. So what that means is a lot of your employees are getting the same threat emails, the same scam emails in their personal email. Sometimes making this a little bit more personal. How do you protect yourself at home? How do you protect your family? How do you protect your loved ones? Resonates a little bit more and kind of has a better sticking potential, if you will.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Next one is which groups are leveraging AI? Max.
So I can answer this one, but also going to kind of diverge a little bit. So some APT groups are using AI. But honestly, what's more important is that non-APT groups are using AI, because a lot of APT groups, most APT groups already create very well-crafted campaigns. It's very detailed, it's very specific, it's hard to differentiate from a normal email. It's very carefully crafted, and they spend a lot of time and resources on creating these convincing emails. So them using AI isn't really going to improve what they're doing all that much. It may improve the scale, but the quality isn't really going to see that much of an improvement. In fact, it may get a little bit worse. However, when you see normal threat actors using AI, that's when it becomes a problem, because there's just this huge jump in the quality of the emails that they're sending out. And right now, I'd say, a decent number of threat actors are using AI, but not the majority of them. However, the ones who are using it and using it at scale are seeing increased return on investment. So as time goes on, there's going to be fewer and fewer threat actors not using AI, because it just doesn't make sense to do it by hand when you can automate so much of it. So I think that what we should really be concerned about most is your normal, people who haven't been that much of a threat up until now, creating these really advanced campaigns and increasingly doing so as time goes on.
All right, I think we have time for a few more questions. So the next one is, what is the best way to detect a multi-stage phishing attack where the first URLs are mostly non-malicious?
I'll take that one. Unless Chancellor Max, you want to. Or we can all lean in here. So the reality is, right? So the initial look of the URL, it goes back to what Rachel mentioned earlier, and kind of what everybody here has kind of mentioned, in that is it a URL or is it a link that you're used to, right? Is that something that's commonly used, whether it's a tiny URL or whether it's, a Microsoft wrapped link, right? Once you click on it, paying attention to the address bar. of the end. I mean, when a relay happens, when a redirect happens, oftentimes you can see it, whether you get a little Cloudflare pop up or some other type of CAPTCHA, or you can just tell your page just reloaded once or twice or three times. The reality is, at the end, when it stopped reloading and it stopped redirecting, look at the address bar. Does that URL look like anything that you're familiar with? The email said it's SharePoint. You clicked on it assuming it's SharePoint, but then it's some, random alphanumeric string, in a .ru domain. It's, I mean, unless you're working out of Russia, that most likely isn't relevant to you or your organization, is most likely a threat. So it really just goes back to observability. At the very end of the day, before you enter any data in, before you do any action on a website, after you click a link in an email, check the URL, the address bar on your browser.
So, and I can kind of add on to this a little bit. So, I saw this earlier today. I had a SurveyMonkey URL, and you went to SurveyMonkey, and then after SurveyMonkey, it immediately redirected to a place that downloaded malware. So, the thing is, the SEG saw SurveyMonkey, didn't bother looking for a redirect. It just stopped right there. So, if you want to invest in a SEG, you need to find one that doesn't just look at the base URL. It follows the redirects. It has web crawlers. It keeps going until it finds the end result. Because the seg that just looks for the first step, you're going to get so much bad stuff. I mean, it's using a legitimate URL as a redirect is very common now. Honestly, I would say the majority of the stuff that I see has some form of legitimate redirect involved. It's just everybody uses it. So you need to make sure that your security tools can accommodate that and they don't just stop at the first hop and say, looks good. You really need to have that automated capability in there.
And that's a good example too, Max, because obviously I mentioned URL, but if you click on something expecting a form like SurveyMonkey and it drops a file, stop. Right? Just stop. Either contact your security team or follow your, internal processes.
And I'll add, this goes back to the topic of the human part of security. These are the types of threats that humans are always going to be better at handling because they're going to have that context. They're going to be able to go through each of those steps and do the full analysis. Whereas the AI defensive structure right now doesn't handle those very well, especially when you get the ones where it's coming from a secure mail dropper that it probably doesn't have access to. You're going to need someone on your side who it does have access to go in and investigate that because your seg is only going to recognize that as, oh, that's an email coming from WeTransfer or Dropbox or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next question is related to this topic specifically. So what options do we have to mimic our own internal testing campaigns to assist in the growth of these threats? And it's both sides of the house. We talk about awareness training, we talk about detection and response, and it really comes down to collaborating inside of your organization to see what actual threats are hitting your organization, morphing those into simulated campaigns so that your users understand what's hitting your campaign, what to look out for. And then that second action is so important of reporting. Condition your users on how to report those suspicious emails coming inside of your organization. That will allow them to package up those reports, get them to your incident response SOC teams, and allow them to be able to analyze and mitigate those threats. And it really is a full circle, and it takes everyone inside of the organization to help in your efforts.
And I will add on to that. On the Intel side, we have published a strategic analysis that kind of breaks down the different sectors and are the I think it's top 10 sectors that we see and the major themes that each sector sees. So just take a look at that, see, what themes your sector is seeing, because then you can really tailor your preparations for your employees.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for one more question, and Max, I will hand it over to you. So one of the signs that we look for is the malicious URL domain. Do you think this is not the case anymore, as the example you mentioned related to GitHub tax link?
So I will say that luckily, malicious content hosted as the final result on legitimate domains is very rare. So you should definitely continue to look for URLs of known good locations. However, it's kind of in line with when we were talking about following all the steps earlier. Like with GitHub, if the seg follows the step and follows that link, it will download a zip file, which is a pretty good indicator that something malicious is there. So if you follow all the steps and you see, okay, is something being downloaded, then you can continue to use looking for legitimate domains as a kind of secondary method of really clearing out what's good and what's bad, as long as you have that final step of seeing what happens.
Great. Thank you, Max, Chance, and Josh. And once again, we want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar and hope this information was helpful. And with that, have a great rest of your day.